And real quick, Daria, you're coming in about 4 dB too hot, 4 or 5 dB too
Okay,
hot.
sure.
Thank you.
How's that? Check, check, check. Hey, hey, hey.
Yeah, I think you're about there.
Okay,
Thanks.
cool. No problem. And I was going to do what I did last week, if that's cool, Alex. Like,
Yep.
I'll let you guys be smart for an hour and then I'll come back.
No, that's perfect.
Okay,
Thank you.
great.
All
Awesome.
right.
No
Thanks. See you
problem.
soon.
Okay, guys. Mwah. See you in a little bit.
See ya. Be smart. Look at her. Hey, everybody, welcome to Office Hours. If you are here on YouTube, you'll see a little link. You can actually join the conversation if you like. If you are here in Zoom and part of that conversation, also look at the chat. You can see a link to Makana, which is where we're actually doing chat. So check that out. And then also, if you're wondering how you become part of the panel, you think that you know more than us, you might. And we would love to have you. So if you think you can contribute to this conversation, we'd love to have you part of the conversation. And really, we've accumulated centuries of wisdom here, centuries of experience at least, and we're shooting for millennia. A millennia of experience, and so if you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you. We start this at 6. Admittedly, we may start a little earlier. We have another meeting that you'll see if you've signed up, you'll see a little link to it that we start at 5. So we start chatting about it, and then of course we have Discord. We distribute the Discord link at 6:40. You can join that as well. So there's lots of opportunities. Talk media. The first hour is all general conversation about media. So if you have questions about virtual production, production management, all those things are fair game. Second hour is generally something vertical. Today, we're going to talk about audience engagement. So we're going to have a little conversation about that in the second hour. And then on tomorrow, we're going to talk about Zoom OSC. And Andy's bringing in a lot of people. So this is going to be a good one. So I would highly recommend being here tomorrow for the second hour. And then, of course, one of my favorite conversations on Saturday, focus on education, talking about virtual education and media production. So those are coming up. And Sunday is just a general conversation about whatever we feel like, more of the same. So there you have it. If you like what we're talking about here and you want to share it, don't share your own link. That is everyone will come up as you. Go ahead and share the Discord link or the Zoom link that I just put into Makana. Bill, do we have a
Yes,
question?
we are ready. Here we go. We're going to start off with a 10-vote question. Gabriel Ung of Malaysia. How do you add value to your clients who want to run live streams on Zoom apart from adding graphics, video playback, and so forth? Clients are worried that we try to overcomplicate the process without seeing the benefits.
So I'll talk always about ball handling skills. So I'm not. The graphics are fine. We add graphics to them if we can do point to points. We'll add graphics. We don't add a lot of other things to it. The playouts. More and more people are viewing playouts as kind of commercial breaks. You just need to know that, as someone I'm producing a lot of them, but they're losing their effectiveness. So playing stuff out in a live event is starting to. Like during a live event, they're just waiting for the conversation to come back. And really, they're waiting. That's why we're talking about in the second hour. They're really waiting for when they can be part of the conversation. And we're seeing that continue to occur over and over and over again in more and more events where we're looking at attrition rates over time within events. That's what like how many concurrents. And where we see a lot of interaction, we're seeing a lot of people staying or staying longer. Sustained dwell time is increased. And dwell time is dropping pretty dramatically when there's slides, when there's presentations, and definitely when there's playback. So the playback should be short if you're going to do that. Long 20-minute videos are devastating unless they're really, really good. So, so little bits and pieces of something like, hey, we're going to show something that's really contextual works, but just be careful of that. For us, the big thing is making sure that the speakers are ready. Prepping speakers is we have clients that are like, oh, because we charge per speaker, so that's, our numbers are like, this is how much it costs per speaker, and we're sending them a kit, and then we're going to spend time with them, and people say, well, we don't want to pay for that part, and I say, well, we don't want to do the job. Like, so we do, like I don't, but I don't say it quite that way. I just say, well, we're probably not the right company for you. Because what I know is that the secret sauce is the speaker prep. That's what makes most of these shows work, is speaker prep and then rehearsal. Rehearsal is where you can add a lot of value, where we're going to figure out how we're going to get into the show, how we're going to get out of the show, how we're going to get from one segment to the other. That's where you add value in Zoom, because no one's doing that. There's all this stuff where people are on. So what are we going to do next? Yeah, I think that we were going to have Frank talk now. All of that makes everyone feel like it's amateur hour. So if you're working with an event company, they're used to Q2Qs and they're used to things happening quickly, and it really feels like it matters when things are relatively tight. So I think that is what I would say the number one value add is to a good event, is just making sure you can hear and see the speakers. It would be a huge advantage for most people. That seems to be something that most people miss, is hearing and seeing the actual speakers. Then being able to powerfully figure out how you're going to integrate interaction with the audience, and then finally, adding playback and graphics is great if you have the capacity, but it's not. I don't think it's as important as the conversation. What people really want to know is how to be part of it. And the more interactive you are with the audience, the less graphics you need. The graphics are kind of the sugar you're putting over something else. So anyway, anyone else? I'm just talking until you guys raise your hand. If you don't raise your hand, then I'll just keep talking. All right, next question. No, go ahead, John.
Oh, John Ibbelson.
Yep, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we have this faculty group that's been meeting not as often now that we're not in session. But one of the sort of ahas came out of it. Probably the most critical thing to do for a class is to really think clearly about how you're going to open and start the class and how you're going to close it on Zoom, so you actually have the way the class ends. And then they say, and stay on, so the people can do the sort of stay behind and talk to the professor. And once the whole team started doing that, they saw an improvement. So it's like you're saying, it's just, can you be seen? Can you be heard? Do you know what you're doing when you start? And do you make it a clean end when you're done?
Every live show is that way. Even before Zoom, every live show is, how do you get in? How do you get out? I mean, and we can talk about it. That's the key with many things that are live, is your infill and your exfill turns out to be super important. Bill, and then Alex.
Yeah, for the kind of things that we're talking about here, which is a formal presentation, it's going to be easier, I think, because people want to do a good job. I've been doing a lot of corporate Zoom meetings and things like that, where even if we produce a video and send it out to people that says, here's how you should do basic framing to keep your head correct in I will get somebody who comes in looking like that constantly. And at what point do you just have to throw your hands up and say, the people who get this are going to do better in this new world of telepresence than the people who just can't, it doesn't click for, and you have to move on sometimes.
When we send out kits, we have people who get these kits and they go, oh, I don't need all this stuff. I do this all the time. And I just say, I get that, but we are sending that kit to everyone. And so we just want to make sure that you look the same level that they do. And they, well, maybe I'll take a look at it. It's like we send suits to everybody, or we send nice clothes to everybody. You just got to decide if you want to wear it or you want to come in t-shirt. Alex.
Alex, you might help. When you've worked with the same client a few times in this last year or so, do they sometimes say, well, you've already got us working quite well. In the previous time we did an event, we don't want to pay for this time. What do you say?
Well, we still prep. We don't have to prep everybody every single time. If we've already prepped them once, usually what happens is we've got a new set of people that are coming in, and then we're prepping them from there. So that's the... we don't have to re-prep people, but everybody that's new, we have to prep them and make sure that they're ready to go. And most clients, after they've done it with us, after they've seen our model for keeping it clean. And again, there's not a ton of pizzazz, but they come back and then they understand why we do it. And the best clients are the ones that say that they decide they don't want to use us again. They go use somebody else, and they come back and they're so much nicer, so they come back and find, they get some other agency to work on it because we were too expensive or difficult or whatever. And then they come back and they're just there's so much kinder about the whole thing, because they just realize how much it is just managing a good event and a tight event that makes a difference for everybody. Go ahead, Kev.
Well, I think we ought to clarify the language here, because I'm hearing what sounds like event producers trying to work out what it's like to produce a program. So let's look at it as a program, not an event. And you'll find that every program has a start, a middle, and an end. You have your top and tail for your intro, your content within the middle, and that itself becomes the structure. And I'm afraid they have to separate the idea that everything is live and therefore happens there and then. No, the best live events are the ones that are rehearsed, always, without fail. I've done 800 programs on BBC Radio now every week. I had the biggest listenership, and that was because of listener engagement. I had more listeners in the 80s in Radio Nottingham than all the radio national networks on a Sunday morning for 5 years. They wanted to know how we did it. Well, we produced and we made it sound like it was live, but it was actually very scripted. And nobody to this day believes it.
Well,
So,
and
production.
it is, and it's all pre-pro and it's all planning, you know, and I'll say it every show if I have to. Amateurs talk about strategy, professionals talk about logistics. That's from Omar Bradley, General Omar Bradley. And the thing is, and that came all the way down to logistics. It's figuring out how to get it done. You can do anything that you can imagine and you can build a structure for.
Yeah.
Anything.
As long as the content,
you know, like, you know, but you have to be able to do both of those things, Jason.
I mean, in one sentence, you play how you practice. That's it.
Yeah. John.
And changing habits. One of the things that improved what our faculty group was doing, just that little feature in Zoom that once you're in there, you could test your speaker and microphone. And now that's our tiny habit. Every faculty member, that's the thing you should do as soon as you log on.
Yeah, there's the funny thing, Blue Jeans will push you straight into an event. Like you just come in and you're like in the event. And so I have this tendency to now I open up Zoom before I go open up Blue Jeans to make sure everything's working, or I open up QuickTime just to make sure I'm on the right camera and everything else, because I don't. But it's very stressful. It's funny that Blue Jeans I think thinks that was useful, but it makes joining Blue Jeans very stressful. And by the way, we had a client yesterday and realized that they use Blue Jeans all the time, and they popped on Zoom and they were like, "Wow, the latency on Zoom is a lot lower," because they had both, for a variety of reasons, had Blue Jeans and Zoom open at the same time, hearing the same person talking, and I was like, yeah, that makes a difference. Yeah, latency is important. Next question.
Moving on to Alan Scott of New Brunswick, Canada. During the mixer hour, there was a question about setting input gain. The discussion centered on how not to do it. So how should I set up the mixer's gains?
Does anyone want to jump in? Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I'll just do a couple of pieces of it, and somebody I'm sure will pop in to do more. But the old tradition, what you learn is that you have to start with a known entity if you want to set a gain structure perfectly. We never really get to perfect usually until we can go back. But that would, in the early days, injecting a signal that you knew how strong it was, and then setting everything to nominal. And nominal on a control might be different. In some rotary pot, it might be 75, 80% of the way, and there'll be a little indicator of where nominal is. On a log tape or fader, it may be right dead center and 50% because it has 50% gain and 50% cut. But you want to get everything completely nominal all through the chain from the signal source to the output at the end. Once you do that, you can start checking every single stage of it one by one to make sure it is feeding the next stage what it wants. And I'll stop there and let other people take it from there.
Sorry, Nikki.
Yeah, there was last Tuesday, there was a discussion in the panel, which I didn't quite agree about, because there was a comment that mentioned setting the input gain essentially as loud as possible without clipping, and then doing the balances with the faders. I like to start with my faders at unity, 12 o'clock or 0, and then adjust the input gains so that it's a good balance. And then with doing that, I have the best amount of resolution in terms of moving the fader up and down.
Yeah, and you can tell me if when you're working with a larger system, setting those gains. Let me know, Mickey, if you agree with this. But how I tend to do is go from the source to the output, and I get it working, and I just start going down that path. Where I set it, do a tone. I do a tone at the first mixer, and then all the other things. The first mixer gets at unity. I set it at unity, and then I set all the gains so that everything's where I want it to be. The tone is where I want it to be, or where it should be. Then I go to the next. And this is why tone sometimes will last all day. I'll go to the next thing down and we'll do the same thing. And then the next thing down and do the same thing. And you just keep on tying them down. That's why you leave tone on for a long time. People get, once you get into production, you get kind of used to it. But the idea is that we don't do anything else until everything is the same. So it's not just, it's whether it's -16 or -18 or whatever. It's that it's a known entity and everything is generating that. If I'm turning anything all the way up, I usually, what goes through my head is something's wrong. Like if I turn anything past about 50, but 60%, 60, 70% is like the outer edge of where, if I turn it more than that, I go, something's broken and I'm going to go back and fix it rather than turning it all the way up. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the same thing that Bill was mentioning, lining things up, calibrating them. What you essentially want is that the only two pieces that vary is your first gain stage, your input gain, and also say if you're feeding out to a PA system, your final like amplifier. That's where you want the things to vary. But all throughout in the middle, you want it to be as much as possible at unity.
You're muted,
Sorry,
Alex,
Bill.
I think.
Yep, sorry, Bill.
And the way I started learning about this process was really looking at one of the traditional mixer fader channel strips, because you'll notice there's usually a slider, but up in the top, less than third, the top 20% down from the top, there's kind of a shaded area often on those, and they have a 0 point right in the middle of that. And that was the way the board manufacturer was telling you, if the signal is in here, it's passing as cleanly as possible. We're not adding too much extra gain and we're not too low, so we have to boost it and maybe boost the noise. So setting for that nominal level from the circuit designer is how you get a gain structure that works. And when we hear, oh gosh, I'm trying to find the right level, I got to turn it just a tiny, and that tells me that the signal coming in is too strong and it's not gain structured correctly. And so there are techniques like putting a pad in front of the signal to get it back down on the range. There's other things you can do to fix it, but it's not right. I agree 100% with what Alex and Mickey has said. You can tell when it's not right. It just doesn't work right. You should be able to smoothly move your fader and get everything you want from little bits of low to little bits of high, but a 1% change isn't going to blow your signal up. That's bad. Oops, Alex, you're still
Sorry,
muted.
next question. Sorry about that.
Moving on. That's all right. Moving on to Jeffrey Breas of the Bronx, New York. On a Mac, how do you control volume using the keyboard buttons when you're connected to an HDMI monitor with built-in speakers? I got a new Mac Mini connected to the HDMI monitor. I can direct the audio to the monitor, but it doesn't allow me to change volume with the keyboard.
Go ahead, Jason.
An easy way, for example, would be sound source. Well, first, I should say it should be manipulating the active desktop. So, for example, if I want to up the brightness on this monitor, I click anywhere on that monitor and then use the brightness up. If I want to mess with the other monitor, and so on and so forth. The same should be true for audio, but if it isn't, Sound Source has a nice little feature called super keys, I think, something along those lines, that it will force map the hotkeys even if the output has no adjustable anything. And I'm getting some hands, so I will defer to whoever's next.
Go ahead, Mickey, and then Raphael.
Yeah, directly on OS 10, you would not be able to do that because your computer is sending out straight sound directly from your from the app going into your display. A possible workaround is to use loopback. Hey, loopback yet again. You could create a virtual device with a pass-through in it, and then a monitor that's enabled that feeds out to the HDMI, and then in system preferences use the output, set the output of in system preferences as that virtual device that you created in loopback, and with that you can use the keyboard volume buttons.
Raphael.
Note that it's the exact same thing on an Apple TV. When you're connected to HDMI and your device doesn't have ARC or something like that, then you have no control over the sound from the remote control.
Next question.
Moving on to James Babitive here in San Diego. Hi, Alex. You mentioned no longer buying spinning hard drives. What do you choose for the most effective, affordable solid-state drives for archiving data?
So I will admit that I still use, I don't buy spinning drives on a general basis. I do buy spinning drives for archive. I probably said that generalization too quickly because they're cheaper. So you put a ton of data on them. I usually copy onto two, it depends on how big the project is, but I try to copy it onto two drives, just identical backups onto two drives to get that working. So I am, I do use spinning drives for that thing. As far as SSDs go, what I throw in my bag tends to be the T5 and T7s are still what I tend to use as kind of my, like, I'm just going to throw these in, transfer a bunch of stuff to them kind of stuff when I'm on the road. I am starting to move more and more towards is it NVMe memory is kind of with little
NVMe, yeah.
NVMe memory is stuff that we're attaching those to the cameras. The big thing we're finding with the NVMe is they are very, very dependent on the enclosure. So heat capacity, heat dissipation on these on the memory cards is super important, and we haven't solved it completely. But we're not, you can go buy you can't buy any old enclosure. There's lots of them, and you think I'm going to get the same speed. If we get ones where our stress test is we attach them to a mini Ursa, and we try to record raw 3 to 1, and we see how long that lasts. And so it doesn't last very long for a lot of them, and so you could probably do disk speed, the Blackmagic disk speed test, just leave it on and just see how long it can go before it stops being effective. So those are the kind of things you want to look at, but the NVMe, I think, is kind of my future of where I'm going to get a lot of the stuff that I'm doing. But the enclosures are something I haven't solved yet, and I've got ones with like little fins and all kinds of other stuff, and I haven't, gotten one. The speed is incredible, 900 megs a second, for these little memory cards. It's unbelievable. Sky, and then Jeffrey, Jason, Stuart, and then we'll move on. Code Sky.
I don't know as I have a solution, but what I have used is the drives I get at Costco, and you get multiples of them for the backups only, solely for the backups. But to have multiples, I use 3 of the 8 terabyte. Now, is that a good solution or bad solution? I don't know. It is a cheap solution, and you get three versions that you can keep in different locations, which is why you have different.
I just use the spinning drives. I get are raw drives, so they're literally they're raw. I just have you can get a little case and you drop them in, and I don't want to pay for any of the other stuff. Yeah. I just need that, and then you can actually buy what look like cassette holders, and you pop them in there and put a name on them and set them in the desk. And
so you have a docking station.
Yeah, I got a couple of them. Yeah. And so but you put it in the docking station. It takes a long time because it's slow, but it will. But then you catalog it. We talked about that before. You catalog that drive, and now you can find it as long as you named it well and you have good naming conventions. Go ahead, Jeffrey, then Jason, then Stuart.
It's important that if you're creating network attached storage or NAS and you're doing RAIDing, that you want to get an SSD system that is actually built for NAS, and you'll have SSDs and you'll have SSDs for NAS, and you'll want to use the same brand and try and use the same capacity. Try to use the exact same model when you do that. Sometimes you can't do that, especially if one of the drives dies about a year from now and you have to replace it with something else. Mm-hmm. But trying to match the brand as best as possible is very important.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm wondering, you said you don't use enclosures. That was for backup, I would assume, not plugging into the URSAs, right?
No, we put them into enclosures for the URSAs. Yeah. So that's the whole. The enclosure is the problem. The enclosure is the issue is that what kind of enclosure you put around an NVMe is the.
Oh, it's 100% of the performance at the end of the day, because it's gonna handle most of the stuff where NVMe's fail. OWC just released one that's awesome. They have a Thunderbolt version that won't work for the URSA, but boy is it fast, and the heat dissipation is fantastic.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Stuart?
2 quick points. One from what Jeffrey was just saying about buying drives. If you're buying for a NAS, always buy a couple of extra at the time you buy and put them on the shelf, because if it dies, you've got one there waiting so that NAS can start rebuilding your data straight away. But for NVMe, There's one thing people need to note about M2 drives. They come in 3 varieties. NVMe, which is using the PCI bus, and NGFF, which uses 2 SATA bus connections in parallel. When you look at the edge connector, you will see a cutout for one type of bus, a cutout for another, and if you've got a Samsung one, it will have both, and it will go in both types of devices and work in both types of devices. It'll just use whichever the system is set up to use. So just be careful when you're buying the drives to make sure you get the one that matches your enclosure. A lot of cheap enclosures are actually NGFF. So you put an NVMe drive in and it doesn't physically fit.
Next question.
Moving on, Gabriel Ung of Malaysia is back with, has anybody tried using Dugan AutoMix to help manage conversations between local and remote callers in a live hall? Live mics are on an input and remote callers on a PC on another input. It should be able to cut down a lot of potential echo issues.
This is exactly how we use it. So,
Yeah, that's what it's for.
Yeah, I mean, well, no, I mean, but I mean, we use it. That is the way we do remote into a live room, is with Dugan. So, and so the first thing we ask, especially working with another engineer that we're not going to be on site, do you have a mixer that has Dugan automix? You know, like, is the first question that we usually ask is are they using a Yamaha QL1 or X32 or whatever, that we know that we can do that. And Brian would probably be better at describing it in detail, but it's basically you're pushing one down based on the other. And we find that is extremely effective. You still have to be careful with your levels and how you set it up, but it definitely works. Mickey?
Yeah, definitely. That's how Brian comes in. Whenever he's on the panel, he has a live speaker in his room, and he essentially pushes the speaker down when he starts
Although
speaking.
Brian's is not always effective. Like he doesn't always have that all the way.
I would still maintain the whole, like, act as if you don't have these tools, make it sound good in the first place, because if you don't have it sounding good from the start without using a tool like Dugan, or what I usually do, which is sidechain compression, the two people cannot speak at the same time. Once the person, say, that's in the live room starts speaking, the person that's remote will be brought down. So the experience for the people in the room, when we get back to having actual people in rooms, will be diminished, because they won't be able to hear, like, complete sentences if they overlap.
Oops, you're still muted, Alex.
Sorry, I was trying to get better at it when I drink my tea. And anyway, so the I think it'll be interesting to see as we go back to bringing people in, because I've become very hardened about the idea that hybrid events don't really work. That I think we're going to find that when we go back and we try to build these hybrid events, people are going to kind of come around to that, and then people are going to make a decision about whether, what events make sense to be virtual and what events make sense to be physical. And the physical ones will go back to people just watching them, and the virtual, and there'll be some interaction. People will keep trying, but it's just such not a good experience for the online audience. Stuart?
Just on what Mickey was saying, and seeing it's post-election season, can we campaign to have all political debates done through Dugan AutoMix, with the moderator being the only person who can speak over everybody? It'd be lovely.
It'd be fun. No, next question.
Moving on to Tony Tang in Chicago, who says, what frame rate does everyone use for their webcam and ATEM Mini for Zoom? I tried 24 frames per second, which had 208 milliseconds of latency, 5 frames. But then I changed to 60 frames per second, which has 83 milliseconds of latency, still 5 frames. Seems that 60 frames per second is better for low latency two-way communication. Thoughts?
Go ahead, Jason.
I'll answer the question as asked. When I use the ATEM Mini, right now I'm on a web presenter, it's 30, just straight 30 with no drop frame. And it sounds like you're saturating your CPU, like your computer, that is a little bit too much latency, if you ask me.
Well, and what I guess I would say is that, 24 is going to require your computer, I don't know. We'd have to look back on what Zoom does. I don't know what happens when you give it 2398 or 24. I think it gives you I think Zoom's always shooting for 30, but I'm not sure 100% sure. I know that most other platforms, whether it's Facebook or Facebook Live or YouTube or Hangouts, they conform everything to 30 frames a second, no matter where you are in the world. It's like you will send out 30 frames a second. For some reason, there's a couple of them that conform to 25, which is kind of an odd. They just say that we're going to do it all in 25. But so there's a couple. The problem is if you go away from that frame rate before it starts sending, there is a conform rate for a lot of these systems, and before they start sending into the system, they're going to try to conform to it. And so you want to figure out what that is. 60, I know it's not 60. So it's definitely not sending everybody 60 because that's a waste of bandwidth. So if you send it 60, it's probably throwing away every other frame. And the result of that is that the motion blur on your video will not be correct. The motion blur, if it takes 60 frames a second input and reduces to 30 frames a second, you'll have half the motion blur. And most people won't notice, especially if we're just sitting here. But if you move around a lot like this, the motion blur won't be correct because Zoom will be throwing away half the frames. Mickey, and then Stuart, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, when the few shows that Zoom-based live shows that we've done, and when we do the play out through an ATEM Mini, we found that when doing 2398 and 23976 and then and 2997, we have to delay the audio about somewhere between 5 to 8 frames. I don't recall exactly. But when we do 30 flat, it's somewhere in the range of 2 or 3 frames.
So it sounds like Zoom is then doing some conversion. If you give it anything other than 30, it's got to work at it. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, Zoom is definitely doing a conversion. That camera is 25 frames a second, which matches the 50 hertz power cycle of the lighting in Australia, which is where the 25 frames will actually come from for products that are developed in PAL countries. Mm-hmm. But I actually use vMix to do the conversion from 1080 25 to 720 30 to go into Zoom, and I've told Zoom what it's getting and the virtual input in the NDI. And there's no flickering, there's no issues, and it reduces the processing that Zoom's doing on the laptop.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely an advantage of having it set to 30 frames per second input. Although I gotta ask, why is the latency having anything to do with the actual frames coming in? Shouldn't it be just related to your bandwidth for your upload?
It depends on how you calculate that latency. If you're calculating the latency based on when you see it on the other end from when it was in the real world, then you'll see a higher latency because it's doing frame conversion. So it's losing a couple frames as it makes that conversion from one place to the other. Next question.
Moving on, Michael Fisk at Spokane Valley says, I have 6 external disk drives connected to my Mac Mini M1, 4 of which are on ACHI and an ACHI controller. Is there an app or way to watch what each one is doing in real time? And he has a note, Alex, he met you on Twitset in 2018, chatted in a photo with, and has great respect for your knowledge.
Thanks. Any way to see drives?
Individual, like, is he asking for individual drive performance? I think iStatistica can do it.
Yeah, I was gonna say iStatistics is probably is it iStat menu, or iStat menu is what I use.
Yeah,
I think it will show you the use of the drives, and I think it'll break them up.
iStatistica is a prettier way to show the same thing.
Prettier than iStat menu.
It's pretty.
I don't believe it. All right, I'll take a look at it. All right, next question.
It's pretty. I like that. Gabriel is back from Malaysia. Hi, I'm running an event in April next year on Zoom webinar. However, being a monthly subscription, is it possible to start registration for participants on my website and then assign them the unique webinar attendee login later? He'd like to avoid starting the subscription too early.
Yeah. I mean, as long as you're not using Zoom's registration, if you're managing the registration on your website, you can do it without Zoom. To register it in Zoom as a webinar, you will have to have the webinar. But if you can definitely set it up where people can sign up, and then you just have to. It's now incumbent on you to either manage how they're getting into the webinar or send them all an email. It says go register for the webinar. Again, that's not necessarily the best customer experience. So typically you just need to manage how they get in. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I would guess that would cause more headache than just getting the Zoom subscription now and
Well, it
getting
depends on
them
how big
signed
your
up
Zoom
through Zoom.
subscription is. Like if
That's
if
true.
your Zoom
That's true.
subscription is 500, it's a delta of like $750, to just have it sitting there for registration. So, or if it's 1,000, or it'll be a lot more. And so yeah, I think that just depends on how big that is. Go ahead, John.
This is the one good thing about their API specifically for this reason, is getting registrations post tense and then moved in therein. So you might want to hit up Grant, because this is what he does very well.
If you want an easy way to do it, the registration in Zoom works perfectly well. If you just need an easy way to get people registered and get them in. If you want to do anything that's at all feels good and is nice and clean and designed the way you want it, you need to build your own and use the API to do that. It's not Zoom's presentation of the webinar is not, top notch, but it's something so everybody has it. It's functional. It's just not great. Next question.
I'm sorry, I was in a different place for just a second. That was my bad. Andy Dolph of Durham, New Hampshire says, looking for recommendations for a camera for my home Zoom setup, $200 to $300-ish US. Thinking maybe a used Micro Four Thirds camera, or should I just get a Brio or something else?
At $200 to $300, I think you're you might be wrestling between a Brio and a Huddle Cam. I don't know if I'd get a used, because once you get that used, you have to know how you're going to interface a Micro Four Thirds as your webcam. So it's going to push you over that $200 to $300 if it's not integrated. I think the advantage of the Huddle Cam is that you have an HDMI out and you have controls that don't require the computer. And then the advantage of the Brio is a little smaller, a little less expensive, and it looks pretty good. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, again, the only reason you'd want a DSLR, I would think, is so that you could take it out and use it for other things other than just a webcam.
And the best I would do everything you can to not do that. It's just what really jacks up people's ability to be on show and look good and everything else is constantly moving their rig. So really figure out what you can afford and what you can do, and try to get a rig that's set. I've been doing it, like bouncing around with rigs, and it's really becomes a thing. And so I highly recommend trying to not do that if you can avoid it.
It's a pain.
Yeah. Next question.
Moving on to Dan Huber of Erie, Pennsylvania, who asks, what's the one question you wish someone would have asked in office hours, but never has?
I don't know. We ask all the questions that we want to ask. I don't know if there's any. That's the whole thing. We have a question and answer. Go ahead, Jason.
I'll give you a kind of adjacent answer. I found that when I'm doing interviews, one of the most useful things to ask an expert, whether or not I know something about their expertise, is what is the most important thing that your average person doesn't know about your field that you wish they did.
All right, go ahead, Bill.
I'll also note, I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. This is one of those days where I got things that will happen.
So the I think that a lot of times when we're talking about this, it's just really thinking to get back to Jason's point, is that it's just all the little details. Every life is really made up of little details and being present. In that, I think that I would just say as an overall thing that what I see people having the hardest time with in general is being present to what they're doing. And so like for here, like most people know in my company that there's not going to be I don't pick up texts. I don't, and I think in our world, it's very easy. Like I turn off, I don't have notifications on, and I look at my schedule and I figure out, like, if you schedule an event with me on the same day, I won't see it, because I got up in the morning and I figure out what my schedule looks like and what my calendar is. And then I look back on around those times, but otherwise I won't look at my calendar, and I come from as a very ADD person. I have very deep muscles in not allowing things to get into my head. Like they're not allowed to be in my head. And so it's not like someone says, oh, everything will be a 5-minute call. Nothing's a 5-minute call for me. It's 5 minutes. It's 20 minutes of me thinking about it. And then it's 5 minutes to have the call. And then it's an hour of me stewing on that call and thinking about other things. It's not 5 minutes, and so, but so to be present and to be working on what you're doing, requires cutting out most of the world and most of the things that people have fed us as something that they think we need to be done, that they think we need to do. But if you look at people who are really good at what they do, they're usually pretty good at being present with other people and pretty good at being present with what they're doing. Go ahead, Bill, real quick, and then we'll move on.
Just real quick, I remember I was thinking back in the early days of office hours, nobody on the panel could ask questions. It was eliminated to just the people watching the show. So since that changed, we are able to ask a question just like anybody else, and that really helps cut down the, I've never gotten this question answered, and it should be, because we can ask it.
Next question.
Moving on to Stuart Fairweather of Melbourne and the panel.
I gotta say, every time Doug's cat. Every time Doug's cat is, look at it. Looks like put your hand down. Put your hand down. This is what I see. And in the grid, it looks like Doug's got this weird little hand coming up.
It looks like a
every time
cobra. Freaks me out.
No, but it's like is Doug asking a question? I'm like, no, it's a cat. But it, at the corner of my eye, when my grid is small enough, it looks like this weird little I'm not sure if I should ask a question or not.
Anyway, I actually call his cat Nessie because it looks like
it
looks like the Loch Ness monster.
That's great. Anyway,
coming across.
All right. Let's go to the next question.
Okay. It's from Stuart Fairweather of Melbourne, Australia, and the panel. Zoom on Android. Is there a way to play a looping video instead of using the onboard camera?
Go ahead, Stuart.
Just as I was typing a note in for Bill, he put it into the questions list. I've got a gig on the weekend that I want to have a tablet being the confidence monitor that I'm seeing the main feed coming back on in a Zoom. But I don't actually need to put anything up. So I don't have a WLM to put up or a Mickey's monitor like what we see in the grid view now. I just wanted a background graphic to run. So I can look at that screen and go, yep, our main feed that's showing on that screen is still working.
I usually have a Mac Mini or something that's an attendee in the meeting that's just sitting there, because I never trust if I'm running a meeting, I never know, or an event, I never trust what I think Zoom is telling me what I'm showing. So I always have an attendee sitting there just going like, hey, this is what's actually going out, so that it keeps me honest. But I think you can do that with Android as far as being able to see it as a participant. Bill?
Well, and that's one of the things I was looking up earlier. There used to be a great little program, but it was an iOS program that looped things. So if I needed to loop something going out, I'd put it on a phone, run this little looping program, and just feed that in through the ATEM or something like that. But it turns out, I think it was a 32-bit program, and it's gone. I can't find it on any of my phones. So too bad. It was a great little simple looping app.
You might be able to, I don't know how to do an Android. You could do Keynote on the phone, and just hit a loop. Next question.
Okay, moving on to Jason Bache of here in the panel from Albuquerque. Ruthless review, time permitting. I'm wondering how this sort of mess continues and how we can fix it. And he has a link here, but I don't know what the link takes us to. Jason?
All right, so I've got the time code. I queued it right up to Craig Federici with that, sunshine cross. Yep. No, why did the time code not work? That's bizarre. It should have. You want to loop back and I'll find the time code again?
Yeah, we'll try to come back if we have time.
What's the time on that?
I want to say it was about 43 minutes in. Ballpark.
Yeah,
we'll come back to it. Yeah, next question.
Moving on to Victor Cajallo from Brookings, South Dakota, and often in the group. How do you side-by-side video in Final Cut or Resolve? For example, two musicians playing at the same time, and you want to show them both on the screen.
Let me clarify. This is on Final Cut and Edit. Two musicians have done videos on their own, and you're trying to put them together, and sometimes you want them to both appear on the screen.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, it's super simple. You're going to take one musician on the primary storyline. You're going to put another on top as a connected clip, and then take both of them and make them 50% or whatever you choose, and then just move one under the other or one beside the other. It's a very simple process, but you want to stack two video clips just like a track timeline, but one will be a connected clip in Final Cut because that's how it works.
Okay. Next question.
Moving on to Trevor Walker of Rosamond, California. What is the recommended way to bring a mixer into a laptop for streaming? Mimolive? I have an XR18 and an MG10. I've been going into an ATEM Mini Pro via XLR to 3.5 inch, 3.5 millimeter. I have also read, I've read USB might be the better option. What say the panel?
I probably do USB. Just know that if you're going to do USB, you're probably going to need to delay it. So if you're not going through the ATEM, you'll need to delay it, which you can do as an effects function inside of the XR18. It's not in the channel delay. It doesn't have one. You have to use it as an FX, which drives me crazy. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, definitely. As Alex mentioned, use the XR18 as an audio interface. Doing that would skip the ATEM's lackluster audio components.
It's a great little box. It's not an audio box. And so, I would definitely take it that direction. Next question.
Okay, we are at really the last question before the second hour stuff. So people are a little behind here. Attila Ace from Ocean Shores, Australia says, does anyone know why exporting a Final Cut XML file from Premiere can't be directly imported into Final Cut Pro 10? I've been using SendToX to move sequences to Final Cut Pro. Is there a better way?
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the answer as to why you can't take a Final Cut Pro XML file directly into Premiere is that they think differently. For example, in Final Cut,
and I think it's going the other direction. This is Premiere to Final Cut, but I don't think it's Final Cut. Yeah, but same principle.
The same principle is they think differently. Premiere is based on the standard tracked software, which Avid and other things are. Final Cut 10 broke that mold and changed into a relationship-based timeline where things are magnetically attached to each other, and the calculations to move one into the other are not trivial. So things like a connected clip or a compound clip don't have exact equivalence between the two programs. So making one go into the other, either direction, is a bigger problem than you might think.
We woke up Chris on that one. Do you have anything to add, Chris? We're talking about getting Premiere into Final Cut. Like suddenly Chris appears.
No, I just got back from taking my wife to work. I missed it.
So that was coincidence? Do we need to read the question?
Total coincidence. Sorry.
I was like, Chris has to say something. He's like, oh, I can't just stay on the sidelines for this one.
I will say that it is intensely frustrating when we get something in Premiere and, you run it through the laps and you do the different cha to get it into Final Cut to do what I call real work on it. It can be done. Some of it doesn't work well. It's most of the stuff, in the late 90s, I did a lot of fighting with people over Mac versus PC. And then I just got tired of it. It's like, I don't care. You go ahead and do your thing. Eventually I'll have your clients. I'm fine.
Well, I think that the issue is it's kind of like, well, why can't I take an engine from a BMW and put it inside of a Hyundai, or it doesn't or a BMW inside of a Mercedes. Like all the little connections are different. Like one engineer thought, I will hook this up. So if you say I want to take a BMW engine and put it inside of a Mercedes, now you have to figure out what all the outputs and inputs and everything else are to get that engine to work. To move your edit is the same way. I mean, and anything between those two cars, they're both cars, but they're made by different engineers with different thought processes, and they all made different decisions. And so trying to the fact that you can get any data from one editing package to another is a miracle.
One is metric and one is standard.
Yeah, it's worse than that. It's worse. When I was in high school, Stuart will appreciate this. When I was in high school, I drove a Datsun 510, and I did every mod you could do on that car. And I remember when I started modifying the car, my dad looked at me and he goes, "Don't do that." I go, but dad, and he goes, "You have no idea what you're doing. You're going to make one thing a little better and break 5 other things. You're not an engineer. People actually get paid to design cars. You don't get paid to design cars. Leave it alone."
And how did it work out for you? Did you?
It's a long story. I'll tell another day. But we changed. Eventually, everything we did broke something else, and then we changed that and broke something else. And there was barely a 510 when we were done with it.
Exactly. Before you knew it, you had a whole different car. Go ahead, Stuart.
Almost.
Datsun 510, also known as the Datsun 1600 here in Australia. If you would like to put an LS1 from GM in a Datsun 510, you can get a product from MSD or Holley that will actually control the engine. Same if you would like a BMW engine in a Mercedes. But just sidetracking, all cars built after around
That
about
wasn't the sidetrack? Whoa. Excuse me, Stuart.
have
That wasn't already the sidetrack?
No, that's not the sidetrack. All cars built after about 1996 have an OBD2 connector. It's part of the standards to make the cars all talk to the tools regardless of where you are in the world. But don't believe that it ever functions 100%.
They are cool though.
Trust
Those little
me on
connectors. The little connectors
Oh, yeah.
are a lot of fun to plug into your car. Go ahead, Bill.
And for me, if you have to do this, obviously, so just take an export of their file, drop it on your storyline, and then build it in 10 on top of that as a guide track. It'll save you a ton of time getting back to where the original editor was. Now you'll have all your magnetic connections and all of the things that make it 10 times easier to edit from that point going forward. So, don't try to translate the timeline. Use one as a guide to do it right in the other thing. And the same way if you're going back to Premiere.
And in general, especially after a recent experience, I would say that you just got to commit to what you're going to use, and then you find people that can use that thing rather than, and that thing for me is not generally not Premiere. So but for us, I look at the events. I just did an edit yesterday, really fast. That was in Final Cut because you know why? Because I needed to get it done really fast. And it was great. And I got it. I sent it to the client. Boom, they said, that's great. That looks good. And I couldn't have done it any other way at that speed, any other way. I grabbed a bunch of raw content. I threw it into a timeline. I shortened everything. I selected it all. I said, make it go faster. Then I went through a couple of them and said, make this one a little slower, make this one a little faster. I just grabbed the little lines, everything else, and boom, it's done, and so Final Cut is great for that. And I have the same event window. We're using Resolve. Chris is using Resolve, and so because it is because we need to do things that Final Cut can't do. So we make decisions about that based on it. But we have to decide that ahead of time, not in the middle of it. Go ahead, Chris.
One of the things that's really interesting is when you're sitting in on a live broadcast where one of the panelists has a voice that's eerily similar to something that you're kind of editing in the background. It's a very strange experience.
That's funny. So we had one question that came in from Jason that we weren't able to get to, but we now have time to get to, and I have it queued up to where Jason was talking about it. So let me show what Jason was discussing, and I know exactly what happened here. This isn't. We can be a little.
I have it queued up here too.
Me too. It's just horrible.
So there it is. So what happened here, and I get it. What happened is this is a long event. So if you look at the time of the event, this is 40, well, not long, but 45 minutes into it. This is why we don't like windows. When people say, why do you always say don't have a window? I was like, because you don't know what's going to happen. So if you look at that event earlier on, he looks fine. It's not that he looked fine when he started and then the sun came across. And so we talk a lot up here. I mean, in California, we talk a lot about southern facing windows because, if they're eastern facing, western facing, you have some sense of what you can do. If they're southern facing, you just got all kinds of sun changing all kinds of times, and so anyway, that's what we pay attention. So what happened there, of course, was that they just didn't do it. A lot of times our rehearsals, we try to do it at the same time that when someone asks, when do you want to do a rehearsal? We always say at the same time as the event the day before. And what we're looking for is what is going on with the sun. We're looking for also what is going on with the internet, what is going on in their house. A lot of those things are fairly pattern oriented. And so doing rehearsals at the same time solves an enormous number of problems that you'll come up with, because you'll see things and you go, oh, I didn't think of that. And you can't always do it that way, but you try to get through those. We had one where there's a guy that, he looked great. We just didn't realize how much of his light he was using the window for. And so then the event is later in his time frame, and it got really dark. And he looked really creepy, and it was in a show that would not be good for him to look creepy.
That
so
is
it was
very Damien from The Omen. That is weird.
Yeah. Anyway, one last question here before we get to the top of the hour.
Yeah, Stuart Fairweather is in with a late question. Favorite 4G LTE booster antennas, and why doesn't Ubiquiti make one?
I don't know, because they're hard or they're taking. But there's third parties that make them, right, Stuart?
Yeah, I'm just going nuts shopping for one because I need one for the weekend. Just to be safe and have more signal for this than all of the other people with their mobile phones who are at the same event. But I'm chasing my tail finding one, and it's like, it's annoying. TS9 connections, by the way.
One thing we figured out for a couple events is that you have events that are high, you got a lot of people and they're going to use up all the cell towers, but they're using all the cell towers in a certain region. And the one thing that we added was a point-to-point connection, microwave, and then our internet connection was just outside of that, well, a fair bit outside of that region in low density, in a residential area. And so we were able to suck up the cell, half a mile away and then pump it back into our system. And everyone couldn't figure out why our system was running while theirs weren't. We were all on wireless. Stuart and then Jason.
Thank you. You just reminded me I have a Ubiquiti nano station I could use.
There you go. All right. Jason.
I was going to ask if you have outdoor access or if it needs to be entirely indoor, and how far away from your base can you be?
Yeah, Mickey.
Outdoor wedding at a winery.
Yeah, fun. Mickey.
Yeah, I've never tried this, but I know Alex is a fan of Peplink products, and they have a bunch of antennas.
Yeah, the Peplink products are great. You can bond them. Lots of really complex routing. But
they sell antennas as well. Although they're mostly terminated in SMA, but Stuart should be fairly comfortable re-terminating.
Yep. All right.
Yeah, SMA is easy. I would just go to a model aircraft group and grab SMA to TS9 for drone stuff.
It's great. Now we're shifting gears. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is the need to engage your audience. And so it comes up a lot, but we haven't really talked about the different ways to do that. And we can talk a little bit about the effectiveness. We can talk and answer questions. I will theorize that it is probably one of the most important things that you do is engaging your audience in today's environment. What you lose a lot of times, the way we describe it to clients is that when you put a bunch of people in the room, they have a certain energy. They're all interacting with you during that event. When you get rid of that room, you have to get that back somewhere and have them feel like they're connected to each other, feel like they're connected to you. And so getting audience engagement becomes more and more important in that environment. So I thought it'd be useful for us to brainstorm on how some of us are doing it, asking questions and answering questions about audience engagement and thinking about, how do we make it better? Because I think it's probably, especially when you don't have a budget, audience interaction is the cheapest way to add production value. I will argue that in audio. So first you get your audio fixed so everyone can actually hear you. Then, if you look at this show that we do, the audience, audience interaction is everything, and so that's so that makes it a big difference. Anyway, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, having done 3.5 decades of bad corporate video, that the typical live show that I've been doing since the mid 80s, if there was a phone-in component back then, and now there's other ways to do it, of course, every producer does the same thing. They pre-build a couple of fake questions in case nobody calls in and there's no interaction. They try and pump the number. They don't do it early enough. It feels like everybody is set in their way of doing it poorly. And I think the thing that is most fascinating to me, and the reason why I come here all the time, is that I'm continually amazed and want to learn how you, Alex, nudge people forward. we talk about all the things to do, but how do you sell that? How do you push that forward to get people to get out of their old and more than likely bad habits and to try something new? Like just your idea of, we're not going to just have a countdown, we're going to have a pre-show. Like, I couldn't sell that to somebody to save my life. I'm not kidding.
Well, so the other thing is that a lot of times this is not really about audience interaction, but it may be about selling people on things, or not selling people on things, but persuading, down the road. Is anyone that's around me will know that I can be very repetitive. So I will say the same things over and over and over again. And usually I'm
sorry, could you say that one more time?
Yeah. I'm very repetitive. I'm so repetitive. But the my wife calls it the little hammer. So the little hammer from Shawshank Redemption, where he dug his entire way out of a prison with a jeweler's hammer or rock hammer, or jeweler's hammer, whatever it is. So they get the little hammer, and my wife will just look at me because she'll see me doing something. She'll just go like this, because I'll just sit there and I'll just sit there quite happily at a wall and just go like this that I haven't seen before, and I'll just do it for years. I'll just sit there and I'll work through it, and so. With a lot of clients, what we try to, what they'll hear me say over and over again in every new meeting with a new part of their team is, we find that there are a couple different ways you can start your show. And your show, the lowest quality way is just to start it right at the top of the hour, because you haven't warmed the edge. So the notification systems haven't gone out, the other things haven't gone out, the depending on what CDN is, you're surprising it and you may have issues. So there's a whole bunch of reasons you don't want to do that. The second worst way to do it is a still. Like says starting soon, like that is the second worst way to do it. And that's what they all want to do. Right. But you say it this way and you don't ask them for how they're going to do it. You just lay it out and convict the process. Without any, because it's not personal. They won't take it personally if they haven't said it yet. So the thing is the second worst way to do it is to use a still, and then the slightly better way is to have a countdown clock. And then the next best way to do it is to have a countdown clock with some video. The best way to do it is just all video. A better way to do it is all video. And then you keep on getting excited. The better way to do it is all video with a little countdown clock in the corner. And you might stop and give them some messages. And then the best way is a pre-show. And the pre-show allows us to test our audio, test our video, make it all work. It also engages the audience. It gets them into the conversation. It allows the edge to warm. It allows them to virally start talking about that they're there at the event. There's something for them to go to. And so there's this whole and you're ready, you're heated up when you get to that top hour. When you look at our show, our show essentially has 2 hours of pre-show, and then it has 2 hours of show, and then it has an hour of post-show. So the thing is that there's 5 hours in there now. And so the thing is that it's but what you will notice is that at 7 o'clock we come out of the gate pretty fast. We come out of that the gate, and we're having conversations, and that's the power of that process. But we are engaging people early on, and we are being part of that. And so I think that part of the engagement is getting out of the way. You'll notice in the pre-hours I spend at first I was there a lot. Now I'm always there part of the time, but you'll notice that I drop out. Part of that's, I got a couple things I got to sort out. I got some meetings in the morning early on, but the other big reason is to get out of the way. I'm doing that a lot of times to get out of the way, because otherwise I'll just keep talking, and so I, want to give people more space, and that's a different kind of audience interaction, is giving them the space to do their thing. So anyway, but it is all about, again, I think that fundamentally audience interaction comes back to a belief that I have, that it's all about community. And Daria's here, and I think she knows it as well or better than I do, that, I think content is, and I've said this again, I'm repetitive, but I think that content is the honeypot that builds your community. So you figure out how you're going to use a certain conversation about your medical supply, about your product or whatever, but what you want to do is build a community, around that. Taylor Swift doesn't make content. She has a community. Lady Gaga has a community. Her Little Monsters are her community. Katy Perry has a community. And to some degree, the Red Hot Chili Peppers have a community. they all, you know, when they show up at a concert, the reason that those tours are so important is that community gets to all come together. All those Metallica fans or Social D fans or whatever fans get to congregate, you know, with other people that are like them. So we think of that as content. We keep on talking about content as king, but it's really an opportunity to be connected via music in that sense, you know. And so I think that, you know, audience interaction can be in a lot of different things, but we have to figure out how to do it every day. And this is, you know, this show is a big lab to figure that out. You know, and so I think it's the best kind of one. I've been trying to figure out how to describe it to other people, and I haven't quite figured it out because it's a bit of timing, luck, you know, and just great people showing up. Stuart?
If you want a description of office hours, a support group for polymaths. As for community,
media polymaths, or maybe just polymaths.
Yeah, but juggalos would be a community, wouldn't they? But I've got to ask, warm the edge. Where does that come from?
Oh, so it used to be a bigger issue than it is now, but we still call it warming the edge. So what happens is the way your live stream works is that you send your stream to I mean, there's a lot of ways you watch live stream, but you send your stream to an ingest point. That ingest point then pushes that to an origin. The origin is the one that is going, I'm streaming all of this stuff out, and I'm simplifying this. People who do streaming will know that I'm simplifying this a lot, but we'll just say, I go to an ingest point. The ingest point is typically not the origin. It goes then to the origin. The origin is now distributing that. Now, what happens is that if you as a user ask for that piece of content, I say, I want to watch office hours on YouTube or whatever. It makes a request to an edge computer, and it says, I want that. The edge goes back to the origin and goes, hey, they want that. When it goes out, that edge hangs on to that video. Now, it actually doesn't hang on to it for very long. It's often measured in seconds, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, to make sure that if anyone else wants that packet, they can have it. So if more people from your region, this is how all live streaming, you know, works in a very simplified way. If more people ask for it in Seattle or in Chicago, it now has that bit. It doesn't have to go all the way back to the origin, because if it did, the reason streaming didn't work before is because everyone went back to the origin. And as it got big, Akamai built an entire business around the idea of it got big, the origin just would go raw, you know, like, and just, you know, just melt down, or no one got any video. So by having all of these servers all over the world, when you ask for your bit in India or in Morocco or whatever, it's not going back to San Francisco to get that bit. It's going to Morocco if there's other users. But the issue is if everybody in a now what most modern CDNs do is they distribute that automatically to some, you know, to outer servers so that you don't go back to the origin no matter what. Because what happens is if everybody jumps on it immediately, we had this happen one time where someone had their own little CDN that they had concocted and they had an edge and they did it all, but they then promoted the event to start right at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and without the edge being warmed, everything came back to the origin, and the origin got to about 15,000, you know, simultaneous requests before it stopped working, you know. And so anyway, that's your little, like, that's why when we say warming the edge, but now we use it in a wider term, which is that when you start live on YouTube or Facebook or whatever, there's a 3 to 5 minute gap between when you started and when all of the people that are going to be notified. In YouTube, it's all of them. In Facebook, it's none of them. You know, so not that I'm bitter. Anyway, so the Facebook one is much faster because it just goes, we're not going to tell anyone, you didn't pay us. But you warm that as you warm the edge out, it just means that all of your listeners and your everything else. So don't say anything important in the first 3 to 5 minutes, because you know that your audience is building, you know, over that time, right? That's part of why I do announcements in the first 5 minutes of YouTube. Like just, you know, like that announcement, the announcements that I do are there to tell everyone how it's going, but it's also, that is me. You watch me, if you watch, I'll be looking up and I'm looking at a certain time to hit, you know, from the time I started live, I'm looking for 5 minutes so that a pre-announcement is useful, but it also is allowing me to make sure that as we jump into the questions, everyone that was going to be notified is notified. And that is important when we come back to bring it back to audience interaction, is making sure your audience is part of that. And by starting it, a couple things. One is doing it repeatedly. We are training our audience to be interactive. Daria, I learned a lot of that stuff from Daria, where we're training. She trains her audience that she's going to listen, that they're part of the show, that they're, like if you look at that, the Queen, show on Live Aid, where they, what they did really well is they interacted with the audience. They got up there, and they got everybody going back and forth. And if you think about the Green, I don't know if Green Day has this tendency to play Bohemian Rhapsody before their show. And so their fans, their community knows that Bohemian Rhapsody is coming. And if you do any search for Green Day Bohemian Rhapsody, you'll see like a GoPro in the back, and you'll see a couple of them from different parts of the world of their fans singing Bohemian Rhapsody. Like 70,000 people are singing together. And, and it's, it's a mess some of the time, but when they get into it, when they hit it right on, it's an incredible experience, but finding ways that we can have that interaction is important. But part of it is also training, doing it. That's why I think it's so important to do events over and over and over again, not just one, because people will just get into it by the end, and it's, and then also setting the pace. Like I repeat a lot of things at 6:43 and at 7:00. There are things that I say every day. And that's a pattern. It's a pattern that tells you guys everything's working. It's also a pattern that constantly reminds people what needs to happen, because there's new people every day, and then you're also little hammering to all the other people, like ask questions, but that, we call it a lot of times with our client flattening the curve. You want to flatten the curve of not everybody learning how this works, on the day of your event. And so that's why, repeated events, regular events that happen the same time every day. I mean, this one happens every day. Recently, I've had a little variety of challenges, so plus or minus 5 minutes, but typically plus or minus 1 minute. I also think that it's, with all our events, one of my big complaints is starting late. I think that, it's a really, I'd rather that pre-show you can start late on a pre-show, but you should start the event when you said you were going to start the event. We when we're doing events, we try to start usually within seconds, and we're calculating the offset so that the external time is when we started the event right on, and so that's because that precision tells the audience that it matters. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, what I guess I'm listening to you philosophize about is you're establishing trust. And you're you're building and managing expectations. And then when that time, because time is ubiquitous, time is because we say this clock does a certain thing at a certain time. So that we are in agreement that at this agreed upon moment, a thing will happen. And then you're establishing trust. And for some reason, when you said that, and I heard the Bohemian Rhapsody, my mind went 1,000 years ago on some battlefield in Scotland, and the king yelling, and then everybody, ah.
Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, there's just such a power to syncing people up, in time, that we're all thinking and I think that's what we like. It's why we go to concerts. It's why we go to events and so on and so forth, is that we are synced. We're literally, in some ways you could say we're syncing our brainwaves, in that process of we're in that same space, and I think that there is something very human about that. That's something that we want to do, and so I think that in the same way that, schools of fish or flocks of bird, do this dance together, there is something very natural about that, and so I think that a lot of times we're trying to find ways, and again, we've had, we do everything from, all I care about is audience interaction. Like this little conversation, obviously I'm waiting for other people to raise their hand or something, but all I care about is that, because I think it's all that matters. Like it's in an event, if I'm thinking about graphics, if I'm thinking about opens and closes, all I'm thinking about is how do we interact with the audience? How do we pull them into the conversation? How do we make them part of the show? Is the only thing I care about. The other stuff is all making clients happy and doing other, and doing what everybody else thinks makes sense while I'm trying to figure out a way to get the audience involved. Go ahead, Kevin, then Jason.
Alex, when you're doing your jobs, who's actually directing the show as opposed to putting it together technically? Are you, so your company, or is it somebody from the client company?
Well, no, we direct the show. My company directs the show. I don't direct the show. I complain about the show. That's what I was checking. I sit and watch the show and complain about it. I don't. I am the complainer.
It just, sorry, Alex, it sounds to me It sounds so much what you're trying to explain. It's just broadcast. It's television production.
It is.
Only a different media.
But the problem with broadcast, is it's not a conversation. It's a one.
No,
most of the time, it's
not all broadcast is, but
not
some
all is.
can.
But I'm just saying that that the problem we have with broadcasters is they don't want to deal with the audience. They get back into that. Why don't we just stack up a couple questions and at least American is.
I was about to say that's the difference there.
And even then, I mean, when you're talking about, right now, I do think that the audience interaction is where online, most of us are online streaming right now. We're not broadcasters. This is where you can play a game that broadcast is not really built for. And you don't want to keep on, trying to make your show look like a TV show basically you're playing at a disadvantage. You have someone who's getting paid. No, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking in general.
But equally, you shouldn't align broadcast particularly as one way of making a show. And if you do, you're locking yourself out an awful lot of audience interaction. I mean, there are so many techniques established over years. If I want to get an audience to a radio show or a television program or online, I've got 3 or 4 things I could guarantee get them in the show, or if necessary, even standing outside the building.
Right.
They're simple tricks, but we've done them for 40 years. Just apply the same things online. It's not hard. It really isn't.
It isn't, but we can do it even better online now than we
absolutely
before.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that in any battle, you want to play to what you are good at. I read this thing about David and Goliath that I thought was really fascinating. Is that there was someone wrote this thing and he said David was always going to win. David was we think of David and Goliath as the little guy versus the big guy, but you had a highly accurate person who could throw a stone versus a slow big guy. Like statistically, David was going to win. And so the thing is that in the same sense, we may not be as big as a lot of the Goliaths that are out there, but we have some pretty smooth stones. And go ahead.
That was Malcolm Gladwell. Yeah, just recently came up with that. Yeah.
And I thought it was great, and that he was that David is, which is funny because Malcolm Gladwell drives me a little crazy at times about that. When he says it, I usually go, okay, well, where was that somewhere else that he stole it from? Because he's such a thief. Anyway, so the issue is that we need to, as live streaming individuals, we need to think about what is our advantage. What do we do well that's better than broadcast? Not how do we be like broadcast? And we see this a lot. Like, how do I make this look like a broadcast? I want a big open, and I want lower thirds, and I want a sweeper, and I want someone, and all that's fine. But I think when you look at the hours on Twitch that people are watching and all these other bits and pieces, the next generation doesn't care about any of those things. Like, they just don't care. Like, they want to, they want to interact with each other. They want to, in Twitch, I feel like they're interacting in hieroglyphics, just all emojis, and so it's, and so they, but they want to interact. They want to be part of the conversation, and they want to be part of the thing, that's going on. And I think that that's what, that we see a lot more. And I think that that's why it's so important that we get good at this. Go ahead, Jason.
Along those lines, I got into broadcasting because I couldn't personally stand TV. I wanted to choose what was on my screen, even if that something was me, from time to time. And as far as I'm concerned, why would you try to make a horse-shaped car? That's exactly the point. We do this better.
Yep, absolutely. Dario?
I love that. That's great. And hi, everyone. Morning. Yeah, Alex, it's funny, because I know we've been doing this for a long time now. And back when I first started doing concerts that looked very much like a Zoom, like back then, I remember then, like watching the news and having this moment of realization that they can't see each other. You see their eyes wandering. How are they doing that? And now it's funny because you watch the news now and everybody's on Zoom and you realize they've finally come around to it, but only because of this really bonkers necessity. But maybe they could finally see the other person while they're talking to them. It's like they were, 10 years late on that. But I totally agree with you. When I saw that this was the topic today, Alex, I was like, I have to come because this is the only thing that I care about. And I'm always trying to experiment and find new ways to do it. And it's funny because people talk to me a lot about how I do it. And I think my way is just totally primitive. It's like what you said. It's campfire, like people syncing up to a beat and having a conversation, and something about having all these little windows with different personalities or just little presents to me. And I just feel so excited to connect with people. So I'm always excited to hear about what other people are doing. But yeah, it's like when you think about traditional broadcast rather than Twitch or what people my age are doing, it's also interesting the not need to like be performing all the time. And as a performer, like that's even something that I like. My next show that I'm planning is around kind of being in the room with me while I'm making stuff, which is something I've never really done before. And I love watching people do that on Twitch and on YouTube, even in real time. People will hang out all day making stuff. So I think that's really interesting too, that like we just kind of want to be together. And I think we want to see people do what they love to do and get into that with them. So it's very different than that traditional broadcaster thing of like, ask a few questions and maybe we'll get the thing at the end, you know?
Yeah. And you know, we try to explain to folks that are going to do a presentation. They're like, okay, we have 4 hours of an event. We'll speak for 45 minutes and open it for 15, like, and then we'll take a little break and then we'll do it again. And I am like, oh man, like think about speak for 10 minutes and then have 45 minutes of Q&A. Cause you know, or better yet, send them the videos. Like this is the homework. We'll still play it during the show, but we'll show you what we're playing up until then so that you can get that done. Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Bill.
Well, yeah, Daria, you could get a look at it this way. Back in 2012, when we were all doing the Hangout thing, it was kind of more of a club vibe. So it's like, hey, Daria's got her Hangout going. Let's all go there. They fill up, and then there's people waiting in line to get back into there. And it's like, oh, somebody's doing this over here, so we're going to run over here and check this out. Check that out for 10 minutes. Go back and forth. So there was always going to be some sort of switching interactiveness on what you did and how you brought people in and out. And anybody that had, you know, like an ADHD effect, they could always bounce from area to area. So that kind of made the interactiveness of what you did and what we were doing on Hangouts just amazing. And nowadays, by us not doing anything, like for instance, I was at a conference this week. It was on the Hoovia app, which is an app that you have to get on your phone. You can't pull it up on a PC or a Mac. You can't watch it that way, and you got to interact that way. It's just so archaic because it was just so drilled down to one platform, one way, and I didn't want to do it. I'd rather be one of the lurkers. Like if that was an office hours type situation, I'd want to be in the chat more than I'd want to be in the video there. But I didn't have those options.
Well, and one thing I will say is that I feel like the reason I kind of keep coming back to Zoom is I feel like there's all these other platforms and they're trying to do all these crazy things to get people to involve. And I'm just like, breakout rooms, you know, things. And like, you can do all these things that make it really interactive and connect people without doing all the crazy interface stuff that people think is necessary. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'm just fascinated by the fact that idioms and change seems to be happening as much outside the broadcast realm as it used to happen within. We had sitcom phrases and things like that swept through culture. Now I've seen it change. And the first time I heard Billie Eilish say that's fire, and then all of a sudden I'm in one of my younger friends' Instagram feeds and I'm seeing fire emojis everywhere. And you're seeing these leading edges of how thinking is changed come through different portals into your life where they used to come from corporate portals. They're now much more diffuse and different. And that's my tap on how is culture changing? Where is it changing fastest? Where are the new ideas?
Well, it always changes
from?
fastest.
Yeah.
The kids these days. That's the design, I think, of the human race, is that the kids make things change. Daria, and then Sky.
Yeah, Bill, it's funny. My mom said to me yesterday, "What's on fleek mean?" I was like, "Mama, you missed it. It's okay. It's over already. don't worry about it." Yeah, Jeffrey, I love what you were saying, and I totally agree that feeling of like almost back in the Hangout days, it was like this feeling of like a speakeasy almost. That like there are little things popping up, and you could jump in. And it's interesting. Are you guys, any of you, on Clubhouse? That's the like latest new thing. I just got into that one. I beat Alex to a social network. This is crazy.
I've heard of it. I haven't gone into it.
Yeah, it's funny because it's a similar concept, but they've completely eliminated video, which I kind of loved. It's just like you're listening to a huge phone conference, but people open their own little clubs and their own little clubhouses and their little rooms, kind of just like Hangouts, and you jump in and get into a big conversation, and you can be pulled up to be someone who can talk, or you can just like lurk and listen. And I've been playing around with it for about a week, and it's in beta, but it's interesting because it brings you back to that super primitive, like we just want to talk to each other and we want to gather around subjects and we want to get deep. And it's kind of like this. I always felt that intimacy that you get online, and even just the intimacy you just get from hearing somebody's voice it's special.
Yeah, talk show used to be like that. That was you could do phone, you could do other things. That was the kind of the predecessor to that. This one, I think if I understand Clubhouse well, they're also kind of going after some celebrities of saying, hey, I'm going to come on, or I'm going to tell my followers, and there's a little bit of that I'm trying to figure that out. Giving celebrities a way to interact.
It reminds me of those early days of G+, when like all of a sudden somebody famous would pop into a room and everybody would flock to the room. That does happen, but there's also just really chill conversations happening. It's cool.
Interesting. Go ahead, Sky.
I'm just reminded of being at the military bases when the mail call would show up and everybody run because I got mail and I got this person, and now the news cycle is obliterated because we used to have a 24-hour news cycle that everything would happen every certain time, but now the military are getting texts from their spouses in the middle of battle that the heating bill isn't being paid. And I mean, the instant connection that we used to not have to worry about, and that you have to deal with it in the moment rather than having time to breathe between mail cycles.
Right. And I'm sure we've stacked up some questions while we talked along, Bill. Do we have a couple questions lined up?
We have a couple of questions in here. We're going to talk. The first one comes from Paul Prusakowski of Gainesville. Second hour, what are your favorite chat applications to embed in a web page with your stream embed? Vimeo's chat embed is okay, but very simple.
They're all pretty simple. Go ahead, Jason.
They're all insanely simple. I'd say one of the most reliable is Restream. I mean, that just simply works, and it does cross-posting, which is really nice.
Any other ones? I'm afraid that the one that I like the most is the one that isn't available yet, which is Mukana.
Well, aside from Mukana, of course.
Right. So we
can't talk about any.
Yeah. So, but the I think that the ones that work really well. So there's this real push to get low latency. Everyone wants to have ultra low latency, and that's because they can't manage their comments. As soon as you can manage your comments effectively, you don't care about latency anymore, because like we're answering questions that were asked minutes ago, but it's because we've separated chat and Q&A. So chat can be this free form, we're all going to talk, but we have to be able to find a way to pull the questions out and make them, something that we can actually manage. And those are modal things, and something we learned what we learned was we created our first Q&A systems maybe 12 years ago. The first one I built was 12 years ago. And what we learned is people were just using the Q&A for chat. They immediately just started chatting inside the Q&A. We were like, oh, we got to fix that. And so we pulled the chat out of the Q&A, and then it just was like immediate, like whoop. And then there's just a whole bunch of things happening, and the questions are going up there, and you can actually, as a speaker, you can use them. One thing that's really important, and the reason we have voting, in our chat, is that when people, number one is you're answering questions for more than, we only have 10 votes here and there, or a big question is 10 or 15 votes in this group, but we've had ones where there's hundreds of votes, on a given piece. And what that does is when there's 243 people that voted for that question, there are 243 stakeholders, in that question that are getting a payoff when you answer it. They're like, hey, I'm part of that question now. Like I put my back into that. And that's why the voting is more than just sorting out the questions. It is people saying, I want to be part of that. The most contentious thing that I do in Mukana is there's a down arrow. There's a down. People, you cannot believe the conversations that I've had over the last 10 years.
There is no purpose of an up arrow without a down arrow. I'm sorry.
Well, I as someone who grew up on a farm, I just call it the difference between participation awards and hard work. So anyway, but from a social perspective, the issue is that for a larger conversation, now we work really hard to answer every single question that was asked. There will be some day when this grows to a point where we can't do that. like it's just that that we need to, we're not going to get to the end in the time frame that we have, and there's no way to answer them that fast. What we need to do is be able to clean it up. Like, what does the audience really want to listen to today and talk about today? The other thing is when it gets that big, right now it's still kind of a user group. We're trying to answer every single question. But how many times when you're in a big event do you answer everybody's questions? You just run out of time. Okay, we can't answer it. So it happens in real events too. You can't get to every question. But what we're trying to get to there is getting people to think about asking a question that moves the conversation forward, from their perspective. I see something that will move, that everyone will be interested in, and thinking about the group, thinking about their part in that community when they ask the question. And they know that they haven't thought about that when everyone votes it the other way, and so, like everyone's like, no, that's not what we're not interested in that. And so I think that it's now there are times, again, no matter, we answer questions in the negatives, it doesn't matter to us. We're trying to get through all of those questions. But the reason we have that is so that people think about it as a group thought, as how do we all serve the conversation amongst all of us, not just what I need. Now, what I need, what we need as a group here is for people to take their own individual challenges and bring them forward, because that enriches all of us. It brings up something that a lot of us haven't thought about. We wouldn't be able to do this. And so you're like, that's a new thing. So every question is valuable in the sense that it's causing that to happen for us. I mean, this whole show runs on that. And so we want to think about both of those pieces, is that every question is treated special, but at the same time, the whole group has to feel like it's part of that. And again, it's a community building operation. Bill?
I think it's even more powerful than that. It's a Skinnerian kind of Pavlovian response thing. I know I've been on Reddit for quite a few years, and the first time I ever had a question or a post of mine blow up and get to like 1,500 or something like that votes, you get all of a sudden your things start pinging, and somebody says, your inbox is going to get destroyed. Just understand this. You're in a different day today than you were in yesterday. You're having to interact with that. You've got a lot of people commenting on what you said, some negative, some positive, or whatever, and they give you a warning like, you're blowing up here. Figure this out. It's going to be different. And the first time it happened, it was like, whoa. But I remember the adrenaline rush of I just made a comment.
The trick with the trick with everything is, how do people put in effort, and then get this positive reinforcement from that effort? And that's how games work, right? If you make a game too hard, everybody quits. If you make the game super easy, everybody quits. So there's this kind of these hills, that we kind of, you kind of put in there that have people earn it, because they value it when they earn it, And so I think that is, part of the, part of that process. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I talked about this before. There was a website years ago. It was called Worth 1000. They did Photoshop contests. So you get a challenge, and then you do the Photoshop. But what their key was on the voting system, because you had to vote after you did your Photoshop, you had to go in the next day and vote on every single one. They had a karma system attached to it. And so you wouldn't just downvote every single other Photoshop except for your own. You'd have to adhere to this karma system, or else your vote didn't count. Now, we can't do it for something like this, but if there was something similar we could do that might work, that's a possibility. And then that brings ownership to the questions, that brings ownership to the panel, just as much as us being on the panel brings ownership to coming to office hours every single day.
Yeah, just because we haven't done it doesn't mean we can't. So anyway, I think karma systems are super important. They just haven't. But being able to kind of manage that over time, I think is the thing, and it's tricky. That feedback is I find that social networks turn out to be more complicated than financial networks. There's so much that you have to figure out, and so much of being in the right place at the right time. And I think that right now the social networks that we have are starting to run out of steam. Because they are in the perfect place at the perfect time. And it's funny that I think Facebook got its antitrust thing, and I was like, it somehow got its antitrust right when it's become less relevant, for a lot of people. And so it's they're like, this is absolutely, no one can live without it. And I'm like, a lot of people are figuring that out. So I don't know if it's the right timing for it. Anyway, next question.
Moving on to James Babbitt of San Diego here. Engaging the audience. Good audio and good video help make a good experience for the online audio. For the online audience, sorry about that. Would the next priority be to use a system like Mukana for the audience to participate in the conversation?
Can you read that again? I have to admit, I will admit to you, I was making sure when Clubhouse came up, I was making sure that I registered my name. I have a thing about registering my name on social networks, and I was like, I haven't registered. Like Daria brought it up, and I haven't registered my name, and I got to make sure my name's on, because I hate when it's like Alex B Lindsay or Alex Lindsay 123 or whatever. I was like, I haven't put my name in it. I may never use it, but I was like, I got to have my thing, and I was like, I got panicked.
I'll let you in as soon as they give me an invite. Speaking of the like earning it, like effort, you have to participate in Clubhouse to earn invites. So once I get one, I will give it to you.
Okay.
I was salty because I didn't get at Daria. I know I had to do my full name.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Anyway, so can you repeat that question again? Sorry about that.
Sure, absolutely. Good audio and good video help make a good experience for the online audience. Would the next priority be to use a system like Mukana for the audience to participate in the conversation?
I'm not sure how. Are we talking about putting video and audio into the questions and answers? I don't quite.
It was just
that.
about engaging the audience. I guess they're looking for what are the factors that enhance engagement most, and after you get good audio and good video checked off, is the next priority to use a system of interaction.
Yeah, I mean, interacting. Well, first of all, I'll say having a good host is really important. We have a lot of clients that, I'll have our CEO, or I'll have our marketing director, or I'll have someone. And we're like, and the thing I try to explain to people is, I was like, the first couple hundred radio shows that I did, I was not that good. And 4,000 shows later, I'm okay at it. Like I would say that I'm about half as good as Leo is, and so the thing is that I was like, it takes time. It takes time to be able to multitask, and you really have to be ADD. I mean, and a lot of executives are not ADD, and I don't know. I know almost not. I literally can't find a host that I know that is not ADD. They are all, because what ADD really is being able to manage lots of trains of thought all at the same time. And at times that can be distracting, but in a show, it's super important, because you have to be able to just do this whole thing the whole time. And you're just and someone who has the ability to do that, but they all end up there. Dinners with hosts that do this a lot is just like this crazy pinball machine, that happens where you can't even remember how the conversation began or where it went. Anyway, so I think that the next thing there is to make sure that you have someone that can run the show, and then build infrastructure around that. You'll see what we do here, which is that I'm also not trying to do this all myself. So Mickey is cutting a show that you're watching if you're an attendee. Jeffrey is working on Jeffrey's working on notes that go into YouTube, and he's also pinging me when I'm not getting things done. Bill, and keeping me honest, and making that work. But that's an incredibly important part of what we do, is so that people know what's going on there. Bill is asking the questions, and that what that allows me to do as a host is be present. And then we have panelists here that are all answering questions that make the show much smarter than I am. I can't do the show without the panelists. And so. So the thing is that we're delegating a lot of things out to a lot of people. When you try to run the show yourself or with one or two other people, it becomes really hard. Jason?
Yeah, I would say if I were to summarize that, the third rule is be interesting, or delegate until you can be interesting, right? Well, if you're in a million different places, split it up.
I can't do this again. I can't do the show and be present and have the show happen without all the other people that are doing it. Otherwise, I'd be constantly going, and then you wouldn't see a show that was worth watching because Mickey wasn't, managing audio or video. You wouldn't know what had happened if you had missed it because Jeffrey wasn't doing what he was doing. I'd be constantly reading questions instead of just waiting for Bill to read them out. And he's managing all of that in the background. And so you have to think about how you're going to build a show that is ready for interaction. Because if you're not ready for that, all these people make the readiness do it. The other thing is that when I get up to do, and this has been the case, if anyone's seen me talk at NAB or any of these other locations, I have a pile of things to talk about, and then I have a conversation, and I do the best I can to have random access to that content. It's why I don't like going to locations anymore. It's because I don't want to be contained by Keynote. You know, like I want to be able to have multiple things I can show you at any given time and be able to just throw them up and talk to them because I want to respond to the audience, not say something and then wait for them to come back. Jeffrey, and then Chris.
And the one thing about what we're doing is we're actually evolving from there. From the first day that I started putting all these notes together to what I'm doing now. I now have a system on how I put the notes in. I'm reading the questions because now we have an outlet to do that. And then every now and then I see Bill put in a question that's meant for the second hour, and I'll go on Discord and I'll say, "Hey, Bill, that question is for the second hour," and he'll go, "Oh yeah," and he'll make the change. And then Mickey will contact me and say, "Hey, can you do this?" Or a few weeks ago he said, "Hey, I lost internet connection, so can you let people know?" Things like that. So we're kind of interconnecting with what we're doing, which is great.
And this gets back to repetition. Like it's why you cannot have a show as good when the audience doesn't know what to expect. The panelists are all new. The host is just figuring it out. You can do a good show. You can do a good show, but you can't do a great show, at that level and have that interaction because everyone's just doing it for the first time. The first time you can't go out and I learned something. I kind of learned how to play something on the piano. Now I'm gonna go out and play it in front of a bunch of people. Maybe not. You might want to practice just a little bit, And I listen to my daughter practice bass and piano, and it really always reminds me of just how much work a great athlete or a great musician, they're repeating this over and over and over and over again, and then we think we can just jump up and do a show. And it's this is, and that it's a crazy thought that you can just jump up and do a show when it's you're playing an instrument, which is, you're doing the show. Chris, and then Daria, and then Sky, and then Bill.
You mentioned the factor, if you were doing too much yourself. I thought it was really interesting back when Leo moved from the cottage to the brick house. And because in the cottage he did, he had this TriCaster in front of him, and then he, built the swivel pod, whatever he called that, the turret, and the
show's got a lot better.
Yeah, it really did change. But
he hired a TD. That's what happened.
Exactly. But for people that had been watching him for a long time, that there was a charm to the way he was doing it. Right. And it's one audience versus another, but yeah, his interviewing got better for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Daria.
Yeah, it's fun to hear about the office hours superorganism, how you guys work behind the scenes. When I first started, my little brother would wave a sock at me if there was a comment on Twitter, and then he would tell it to me, and then I would answer it. But yeah, and also just notes from the best musician I know. My mom's getting all the credit today. Juilliard trained classical musician. Her rule is a rule of 7. If you can do it 7 times in a row perfectly on your own in private without making a mistake, you might be able to do it live in front of other people, because that extra adrenaline rush will take you other places, and sometimes that gets bumpy. And then, as we all know, the technology always wants to break, or maybe I just always break things when I try them. Alex knows I've broken everything I've touched.
Well, and one of the things that's important about that, and I know we're getting into a little bit of show design, but one of the things when you do it, one of the things that's important is one of the reasons to do lots of little shows is that when you fail on something, if something doesn't go right 10 shows in, it's 10% failure. If it doesn't go right the first show, it's 100% failure, or the second show, it's 50% failure. And so being able to be okay with something not working perfectly, or your audience being okay with it, has a lot to do with how many times you're doing it and what how many times they interact with. Oh, they're having a little issue right now, because generally it works great, and so that's in the same way that, that's how you manage your relationship with other people. Like if you're late all the time, then then that's a complaint. If you're only late once out of every 100, then they go, well, they're usually on time, and so you just want to think about, how do you build that process with them. Sky, and then Bill.
So a little behind the scenes, we don't have tally lights on our cameras at Matt in the kitchen. So I'm physically pointing at which camera to look at with a rubber chicken.
Yeah.
So
there's that.
Well, that was weird. Your audio just went left, right. The other point was going to be that it takes days to type a book, but it takes years to write it. And that's the tip of the iceberg is just so much smaller by comparison to how much is, underneath. And again, what we do is hard, but it's very visible is little.
Yeah. And Bill?
And maybe just a couple of days to read it after those years of work went into distilling it down to the essence. That's one of my challenges. In fact, I've missed a couple of things today because I'm thinking about a thing about the operation of the show that hit me in the first hour. And then it's just this pulling, I have to be back here. I have to be back here. I can't let my mind wander, but my mind really wants to process that little thing I saw. And it's hard to get out of that mode and just be 100% presence. It is, I think, the actor's true skill. The presenter's true skill is that being present and not getting distracted from your core vision.
Yeah, I will add that Count Cluckula is never more than an arm's length away. But no, at the end of the day, it's really, it's like this combination of being approachable and at the same time, being not that entertained by yourself and, allowing your audience to entertain you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
It seems vaguely appropriate. I used to work for Martin Yan on PBS, and Martin always got confused which one of the 4 cameras to look at. So I taped a little stuffed bunny on camera 2 because that was the one we wanted him to talk to. The other stuff was just for chopping and whatnot, stirring and frying.
When I think about audience interaction, I think of a quote from Lao Tzu that I'm not going to remember which one where it came from. It's somewhere in the Tao Te Ching, which is, when the master has finished his work, the people say that we did it. That's the, when you've, when you figured it, when you figure it out, you get out, when you've gotten out of the way, it's not that they did it. It's not that I did it. It's that, you have to constantly be figuring out how do we do it. So when you think about audience interaction, you always want to think about how do we create a show, as an audience, and how does you're not getting audience interaction for some marketing term or some whatever. It's really easy to distill it down to that, because then it becomes transactional, to the point that Bill was talking about earlier, or Sky was talking about earlier, sorry, that it's not a transactional experience where it's not a audience interaction is not an ingredient you add, it's the meal. It's the, and so you want to keep on thinking about, how do you do that, and how do you get to a point where we as a group create a show? Go ahead, Daria.
Yeah, I think you need to write like the Tao of Alex. I'm like taking notes. You said so many great things this morning. I'm like, okay, new law for living. But yeah, I think maybe it comes down to just being curious too. Like, I feel like that's the quality I look for in people, even when I want to make new friends and find new business partners and people to collaborate with, is intellectual curiosity and emotional curiosity. And it's like, you don't have to try if you're actually just genuinely curious about what could happen and who you're going to meet. And then that's the one thing I think that I have that makes my thing work. I didn't learn how to do any of this stuff on purpose. I'm just genuinely fascinated by people. It's beautiful to just see what happens. I have a rule when I'm filming and when I'm doing a show that I try to remind myself before every show is whatever happens is perfect. Like, do everything you can do to prepare, but then whatever happens is perfect, and just be present with whatever's happening.
Yeah. I don't know why Chris Fenwick is showing us one result. Anyway,
a perfect Google is when you get one search result. I searched the phrase "when the master has finished his work," about one result. I got one result of it.
There you go. Doesn't even look like it's
When the master has finished his work, you will get one Google result.
Exactly.
There it is.
Exactly.
It will be perfect.
Sorry for the distraction.
So anyway, the next question. We're going to go through these questions pretty quick. We're running out of time. Go ahead.
Moving on to Dan Huber of Erie, Pennsylvania, who says, our department is going to try a virtual Christmas get-together. In years past, we've done bowling, arcades, axe throwing, and so forth. What can I do in Zoom that will be different to engage our people?
Go ahead, Kev.
Charades.
Charades? Charades.
You've got to perform then on camera, or it gets you interacted.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Anything that involves throwing things around screens will normally mean your interaction is very, very short.
I've told this story before. I'm going to acknowledge it, but the most interactive thing I've ever done was and I'm not recommending you do this because it's dangerous, but on so many levels, we took a database output and connected it to a flamethrower. And so that if you type fire into the comments, if enough of them, there's a little graph. Chris, who might be watching, built the little graph, so it would just read the little graph, and when it got to the top, flamethrower went off. That was the response, and so it turned. Basically, it's a kinetic interaction where if you turn something on, and so the audience was pretty excited about the idea until they saw the flamethrower going off, and then they were really excited about the idea. And so when they realized that they could actually turn a flamethrower on with their audience interaction, we got to 140,000 interactions a minute. Just in case you're wondering, a lot of CDNs can't manage that many. The database isn't built for 140,000 interactions a minute. It causes all kinds of other problems.
I want to know how you kept that flamethrower in fuel at that point.
No, we had to tweak it a little bit, but the only other time, here's the funny thing is, let's get back to community. We only saw that many interactions once before. So before that, and it's one of the reasons we got into it, we worked on a show called The Holiday Hole with Cards Against Humanity, and they did the thing where they dug a hole in Illinois for no reason. Like they literally just dug a hole. They dug a hole, and you had to pay them to keep them digging the hole. And they weren't promising it was going to go to charity. They just said, you have to pay us to keep. We're going to start digging this hole. And they always do something for Thanksgiving for Black Friday. That's anti-Black Friday, right? One time they said they'll send you a dog doo-doo, and they did. And one time they said we'll send you nothing, and they did. And this time they were digging a hole that you had to pay them to keep digging. And in the FAQ it said, people would say, well, why aren't you paying us? Why aren't you giving this to charity? And their response was, why aren't you giving it to charity? So anyway, what made it fascinating, we put these cameras on the big backhoe that was, I'm not talking about like digging, like it wasn't like a farmer digging a hole. It was a backhoe and earth mover and a trucks and things. And they're digging this giant hole in the ground. And we put cameras all around. We had cameras on the arm. The audience, it was a 48-hour stream straight. So it worked all night. And there was an audience there all the time. And it ended up on NPR on Saturday morning edition or whatever, so Saturday edition or whatever. And but they were rating. It got to a point where people were rating the scoops. So they'd scoop the dirt up and they'd pull it up, and then you just see this string in the chat going 77779, and then there'd be this huge argument about how that is not a 9. It has this problem, and it has this, and they had gotten into this like whole thing. But what they had done was they had built a community around something. They had done something simple enough that everyone just got into talking about it, and it became this thing. Well, at the end, when they were shutting it down, people saying goodbye and this was amazing, and it was a real experience for people, got to 999 interactions a minute. That's when we realized that YouTube has a limit of 999, and so and it was just like, because everyone was, but they felt connected. It doesn't have to be. Again, it doesn't have to be why we go to the baseball game or a football game or a like all those things are because we feel connected. Jeffrey?
So Angela actually asked this question in the pre-show, and my answer is going to be more the fact of what are the people that are participating in your Zoom session? Are they going to be? Are we going to be on a business side? Are we going to be on an entertainment side? Because then I would suggest things like, like Sky does the whole, was it that elephant, where basically they're doing table reads, or they're doing improv on that. Table read, you could always find a script from a movie or something like that, or TV show, and do a table read if you've got creative people in there. But if they're not creative, if they don't like that type of stuff,
the tricky part is not making people uncomfortable. Like it's just trying to figure out a way that people, I think that finding things to do together. I think trying to sing Christmas songs over Zoom is really fun. Would be fun, given how bad the birthday ones are. And then, but I think that using breakout rooms and letting people kind of hang out, and maybe even having different entertainers in different breakout rooms would be something I would think about in that area. And people playing, get Daria to play some music for you. Do other things like that, but get someone to play and interact, I think would be a lot of fun as well. So putting different things into different breakout rooms that people can go to. I think giving people lots of places to go rather than it all being one unified thing. There might be a couple unified things like comments and questions and so on and so forth. Now we're going to move to the other questions really fast because I have a hard out in about 3 minutes because I got to start the post show. So we'll all move it over. You guys keep talking about it. All right, next question.
Jeff Francis of Columbia, and here on the panel, says next Tuesday I'm producing a virtual holiday jazz happy hour live concert. I need ideas for pre-show material.
Requests. I would have
Yeah.
people posting requests and playing them. I think that would be a lot of fun. Bill?
I'd pose a question like, what would be the weirdest jazz trio or combo that would work out of professional musicians, and see what people came up with.
Next question.
Moving to Alex Johnson of, doesn't say where. How about using games and so forth alongside a Zoom call to drive engagement? I've seen quiz apps that work okay, but how can we get people to relax and be involved?
I think polls can be fun, but I do think that request and interaction, I think, is a tricky thing, and games can be really hard to really high. You're flying really high, and the ground is really far away. Things can get really sour really fast. Go ahead, Gev.
Don't ever use games with apps or anything that requires the audience to sit down and look at something and react to that in answering a question, because they're not engaging with you. You want the engagement that you're asked for. They've got to be in this screen, in this show all the time and actively listening. That's not the way to go about it, by sending away to an app to answer a question. You may as well just answer questions like this and like a quiz show. Same difference. At least they're there and they're present with you.
And because I have a hard 9, I'm going to have to cut out here. So I'm going to, we're going to continue this conversation in the post show. I'm going to do the hard cut here. So I'm just going to start the next show for the post show. So if you guys want to come over, you're more than welcome to. I think folks in the emails that have been sent out to you when you registered, there's a link there that tells you where to go. And
thanks for whoever wrote triangle, theremin, and tuba for the trio.